Well, the Arizona Diamondbacks have officially done it. They called up their top prospect, Jordan Lawler, but it comes at a bit of a cost. Steve Zinsmeister with Alex Weiner covers the team at ArizonaSports.com. Big day that we've all talked about for a couple of weeks now. Jordan Lawler, top prospect, really the top prospect in the organization. Spent about 2 weeks in Reno,
Sure.
And that doesn't seem like a long time, but for a guy who's one of their super prospects and really one of their only ones, there's this blatant hole at the major league level at third base. There's an opportunity for him to play shortstop at the major league level. It made sense that they had to go out and make this move. It's just, it comes at the cost of DFAing your longest tenured player in Nick Ahmed. So kind of a bittersweet moment for the Diamondbacks.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack with everything that happened yesterday. So the game happens, they win 12-5, and then kind of like going behind the scenes a little bit. Usually like Torrey comes and talks first, and then you go to the clubhouse to get the pitcher, and Corbin gets hit with a pitch. He exits the game. It's like,
Twice.
Gets hit in back-to-back plate appearances. He gets hit by a pitch, gets hit in the wrist, has to leave. It's like, oh, that's going to be the story of today. It's like, is Corbin okay? So then post-game in the interview room, Zach Davies comes in first. It's like, uh-oh, that's not good. Usually Torrey is in first. And then Alec Thomas, after he drove in 5 runs, comes in second. And so it's like, okay, what's taking so long? And then Corbin comes in third and is basically like, I'm totally fine. X-rays came back negative. It hit me like on a meteor part of like the wrist area, and I expect to be good to go. And then the news comes out. Nick Pecoro was the first to break it. Torrey comes in and he announces it himself, which is also atypical because usually he lets the roster moves go out and then he'll address them after they are made public and official. He kind of took the onus to do that. He was clearly emotional after having the conversation with Nick Ahmed, who's been there the entirety of Lovello's tenure. So yeah, it was so much stuff kind of flying around. But at the end, Jordan Lawler comes up, somebody who they see as a high upside prospect who they needed more production out of that spot against left-handed pitching. They hadn't got it from Nick Ahmed this season. And, Ahmed never been an offensive superstar, but typically he has natural splits throughout most of his career. This year he's had pretty aggressive reverse splits and hadn't been getting it done against lefties. So you bring up Lawler, who has been crushing lefties, albeit at the minor league level. And so now it's kind of like this exciting new era of like Diamondbacks baseball where you have Jordan Lawler, with Corbin Carroll and Alec Thomas. It's just another guy, another one of their top prospects in the mix. And now he's got, 3 weeks to help contribute to this team's playoff push.
In Amarillo and Reno combined this season, Jordan Lawler has 20 home runs, 67 RBIs, 36 stolen bases, by the way.
He had 39 last year.
Yeah, and he's got a 278 average. That's been a lot higher in Reno than it was in Amarillo, which I find interesting. The slugging is almost 500, which is really, really good. So there's no doubt this is a good player. He brings an element to the shortstop position you haven't really had maybe ever in the Diamondbacks history, and that's a ton of speed, power. He's got pretty much every tool in the book.
Sure.
And so in that way, I think it just became obvious they couldn't wait any longer if they were going to put the best team on the field to try to make the playoffs. There was no argument that Jordan Lawler wasn't the best option.
Sure, and obviously you want somebody to get the reps. He just got promoted in the middle of August to AAA. You want to see them get the reps first, but at some point, I guess kind of backtracking a little bit, he got off to a rough start offensively this year. The first month and a half, 2 months, he was hitting below the Mendoza line. There was thought of putting him on the developmental list. But pretty much from June, July into August, he was red hot for AA Amarillo. He gets the call up to AAA and just continued that same projection there. So yeah, he had done, he had shown the ability to come up and hit at different levels. Now it's a major jump to the major league level, but he's a quality at bat. He doesn't swing and miss a ton. He's got great bat to ball skills. And you're right about the power, especially for a middle infielder, somebody who can hit 20 home runs. It's a minor league season, but it's still power that they haven't had from, the left side or the infield really this year. And kind of going back to what the Diamondbacks had right now, third base has been sort of a black hole offensively, especially recently. Longoria's had his moments this year. Emmanuel Rivera's had his moments this year. But overall, that's been a position of weakness right now. Lawler has played 1 game at third base in his minor league career, and it just so happened to be the night before he gets the call-up. So, but he's still an option over there. Lovello has said as much, and you can put him at shortstop. You could put Geraldo Perdomo at third base, who has more experience there. Maybe it's a situation where, shortstop, you have a lot more responsibility, and because it's throwing a lot on a 21-year-old coming up to the major leagues in a playoff push, that maybe let him play third base, and it's more of like a read and react position than shortstop is, and have Perdomo, who's been there doing that at shortstop all year. I'm not sure what that balance is going to look like, but yeah, you're right. The upside is tremendous offensively. Once he gets on the bases, kind of like Corbin, he can make anything happen, really. So yeah, it's just they boosted the ceiling of the team while costing them some, veteran depth who they'd been relying on for a long time in Nick Ahmed, but he just wasn't getting it done against lefties this year, and that's what they really need going down the stretch.
Wouldn't be a bad pinch runner in a game where he doesn't start.
Sure,
as well.
Sure.
So it's a guy who can carry a lot of weight no matter what position he's playing, no matter what he's doing.
Yeah, and they're about to face Justin Steele. So
true.
Who's been the best, left-handed starter in the National League this year, arguably him and Blake Snell. But yeah, I'm sure that definitely was a factor too in trying to get your best possible lineup for this series.
Yeah, and with that, Torey Lovullo has already committed to playing him 100% of the time against left-handed pitching.
Yeah,
that's a pretty bold commitment from a manager on a 21-year-old rookie. But then you look at the splits and it makes sense, right? In the minor leagues this year, he's hitting .423 against left-handed pitching compared to the .249 against righties. I'm not worried about the .249. I'm just trying to point out how dramatically awesome that is against lefties. Yeah. His on-base is .506 against left-handed pitching. He's on base every other time. OPS of 1.267. That's 500 points higher than against righties. It's insane how good he's been against left-handed pitching, so I get the commitment early. I do hope that we continue to see him at least a little bit against righties, because if you don't play a guy against righties, he's not going to get good against righties. So I do hope that we see a little bit of that as well. The last time I saw Jordan Lawler in person would have been the exhibition series that they play at Chase Field right before the regular season.
Against Cleveland.
Against Cleveland. I was sitting behind home plate. Not to humble brag here, but the only time I've ever shelled out for behind home plate. And he hit a home run in that game, that last, or at least the last one that I went to. And then I think I saw him in the fall league as well. This is just a player that every time I see him on the field, he does something that wows me. Mm-hmm. And the only other player I can really say that about lately for the Diamondbacks is Corbin Carroll. And it's not that they're identical players. They're really not in a lot of ways, but that energy and excitement that fans are going to have about this particular player compares only to Corbin Carroll.
Sure, I totally agree with that. And it's so fun, interesting, because last year they make the call up for Corbin at the end of August. This year they do it for Lawler at the beginning of September. Corbin was the 2019 draft. Lawler was the 2021 draft. And that makes it so interesting because, they did it with Corbin last year. They have to do it with Lawler this year. Lawler's a whole year behind. And so for him to make that jump this quickly, and granted, he didn't miss an entire season essentially like Corbin did with a shoulder injury back in 21, but Lawler's had his nicks and bruises too. You mentioned the fall league. He played 11 games and got hit by a pitch and was done for the fall league too. So, but for him to make this ascension so quickly, it really says a lot about what he's been able to accomplish in the minor league level. So yeah, absolutely, there should be a lot of excitement for this. This is probably the most exciting stretch of Diamondbacks baseball probably in a long time, just given they're this close. They're half a game out of a wild card spot, I believe, going into play against this, going into the Chicago Cubs series. They got 3 home series left. I mean, this is going to be pretty exciting stuff for D-backs to go see this guy.
Yeah, I mean, if we got to October and they missed out on the playoffs by a game or two, and Jordan Lawler was sitting in Reno raking, we would all be looking at each other like, "What are we doing here?" Yeah. Like, it's the obvious thing. And so I think they made the right choice. I remember I interviewed Jordan Lawler on my show in the fall league, and I asked him, "Has the team given you any sort of time frame? Like, hey, you could get called up this year," or "Hey, we're probably thinking 2024." Right. And he played it cool, and he says like those conversations don't really happen. They don't tell you ahead of time, like, because then there's unrealistic expectations, and that can mess with a player's head. Like, I'm supposed to be called up by now.
Specific date, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and so everything he said made sense to me. But then it's funny how quick things developed, because like you mentioned, Lawler played third base the other night in Reno. And everyone's like, all of a sudden, they're preparing him for a natural call-up because they have a hole at third base.
Less than 24 hours later.
And then,
there you go.
Like 12 hours later, Nick Pecoro writes a piece for the Arizona Republic that says the Diamondbacks are preparing him for a potential call-up. Then hours later, they called him up. So
Yeah.
it almost feels, I know it's not this way, but it almost feels like the Diamondbacks realized within like a 12-hour period, oh man, we got to call up this Lawler kid. He's pretty good. I know it's not how it worked, but it just felt that way with the urgency and the immediacy of him playing third base, which Torey Lovello has already said is an option, that they could play him at some third base.
Yeah, that felt like, I didn't realize until this morning because Amiel Sade went on the air. Lawler had 2 home runs in his last game as on the Reno Aces. So they asked Amiel on Wolf and Luke, I believe it was, and he said, oh yeah, he played third base last night. So I go back into the game log. I was like, oh my gosh, he played third base last night. That's a bigger deal than just somebody switching positions because he hadn't done it before. And, they've been adamant about him playing shortstop and him being a work in progress at shortstop, having all the athletic tools to do it. It's just about perfecting the position, and he's been improving a lot at that. So to move him over to third was just like such a ding, 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 ding. They're ready to really give this guy a serious look because they know he can fill that role potentially with them, given the lack of production they've had there. So, yeah, that immediately set off alarm bells. And then within like 30 minutes of me listening to that, Nick's article comes out. It's like, okay, so this is going to happen. It's just a matter of, is it after today's game? Is it going to be going into the New York series? Because usually this happens at the beginning of a series. And so it'll happen, unfortunately for us, it happened at the beginning of a road series.
Yeah.
It would have been great to get to watch him in person for the Rocky series, let's say, but that didn't happen. But yeah, it felt inevitable once. It's like, okay, they're switching his position. That's because they're going to try to slot him in here somewhere. I was curious what other move they were going to make. So is it going to be one of the third basemen going down or getting DFA'd, or is it going to be Ahmed? And it was Ahmed. So that also gives you a look as far as like, oh, against lefties, they're going to put him at shortstop and keep, Longoria or Rivera at third base. And then against righties, maybe it's Perdomo at shortstop and Lawler at third base, or maybe some of the time it'll be Lawler and some of the time it'll be Jace Peterson and some of the time it'll be Longo. I'm not sure what that balance is going to look like, but yeah, it felt inevitable once we got to a certain point.
I want to dive more into Nick Ahmed and his time as a Diamondback here in just a second, but the last question I have for you on Lawler, my understanding of postseason roster eligibility is that you're supposed to be on the roster, on the 40-man at least, on August 31st when you're going into September. Jordan Lawler was not. He was called up, what was it? Yesterday was the 6th, so about a week late.
I don't think he's officially been called up yet either.
Okay, so
I think it would be technically
maybe today then, yeah. So about a week late for automatic postseason roster eligibility. That doesn't mean it's the only way you can make the postseason roster, though. You can make it as an injury replacement. He would basically have to replace somebody who's already on the 60 or I think even the 10-day IL or whatever it is. So I think there are ways they can finagle him into their postseason roster. Is that as easy as I'm making it sound?
Yeah. Okay. Pretty much. I mean, you have to have somebody on the injured list for a certain amount of days based on what their injury designation is. They have plenty of guys. They have Austin Adams and Mark Melanson and Dre Jameson, who's, Torey has said his season isn't necessarily over, but it's sort of a wait and see, and it would be at the very end. Tommy Henry, whose season is likely over. So they have guys whom he can replace. So yeah, if they do get into the postseason, they shouldn't have much of a problem getting him on the roster. One area they might have, where they do have a little bit of a question, I guess it's not much of a question, but is that backup catcher, because they made several moves yesterday, and I guess we can go into other ones later or not, depends. But so it was the Lawler for Ahmed switch. They're going to call up Ryan Nelson to start against the Cubs today on Thursday, and they sent back Bryce Jarvis. And then they also optioned Jose Herrera, the backup catcher, because they claimed Sebi Savala off waivers from the Chicago White Sox. So I guess by optioning Herrera, Savala is going to come up to the major leagues and be the backup catcher for the rest of the season, I suppose, like that. But one of the rules for postseason eligibility is you have to be within the organization by September 1st, and that's not going to be the case with Savala. So if they do make the postseason, they would have to bring back Herrera, which is, kind of like, okay, so why did you get Savala then? But
it's kind of odd because
it's an interesting situation.
If he's going to be sitting in Reno for the next 3 weeks, then is that the best lead-in to being on a postseason roster? I mean, you would think he would get brought back at some point in September.
I mean, if they make the postseason, he's not going to start any of the games anyway.
Right. No, I agree.
It's going to be Moreno. So, yeah, I guess they figure. I don't know. I'm not. That's an interesting one. Maybe because Savala does have a lot of team control left, that he's just catcher depth for the future, and he's a good defensive catcher and a good blocker and a good framer, and that maybe he can help, defensively a little bit more down the stretch, and then they can turn to Herrera in the postseason when they'll be leaning heavily on Moreno. I don't know, but yeah, as far as postseason eligibility rules, that's sort of the tugging.
At least we're not back to a 3-catcher system. I've had a lot of nightmares from
no, that
all
wouldn't
the
have
years
made,
of the
that would not have made
system.
any sense for this roster. No.
Let's dive more into Nick Ahmed because I think he deserves this conversation. It was clearly a difficult decision for the organization to move on from their longest tenured player. He's been here about 10 years. He's been here for the entirety of Torey Lovullo's tenure, as well as Mike Hazen. Torey looked torn up by this. He was on the verge of tears talking about it. He discussed how Nick Ahmed has basically been his right-hand man, almost like a manager on the field. And when he makes decisions, they're on the same page all the time because they've just been around each other so long.
Yeah.
And I understand that. I also understand the business decision here. And Nick really laid it out pretty well, too, very professionally. He understands, he's just not hitting. And you look at the last 2 seasons in particular, maybe 3 seasons, he's hitting 212 this year. His on-base is 257. That's unacceptable from an offensive standpoint. His OPS plus is 54. It's the lowest of his career since he was practically a rookie. So he's just not getting it done on offense. His defense, while I think has slipped a little bit since his prime days, he's still a very good defensive replacement. But at this point in the season, they didn't think a defensive replacement was worth keeping around when you have the offensive upside of a potential player like Jordan Lawler. It sucks to see Nick Ahmed go. I think he's got an argument for best shortstop in Diamondbacks history just because of the longevity and the defense being at an elite level. I don't know who else comes into that conversation. Steven Drew comes to mind, maybe, but it's not a crowded field at that position. He's been holding it down for almost half of the franchise's lifespan.
Yeah, that part of it's pretty crazy. I mean, out of 25 years, he's been the guy. They trade for him in 2013. He makes his debut in 2014, and he's just been there. He's been penciled in for such a long time. Torey said, after the game and after he announced the news that, he's imagined them making the postseason and one of his first embrace being Nick Ahmed, given everything that he's been through with the organization. He's been there in 2017 when they make the postseason. He's been there in 21 when they lost 110 games. He was there before Lovullo. So it's, it is definitely probably bittersweet. On the field, it makes all the sense in the world. And you're right, Ahmed took accountability for that. His job was to hit lefties and to provide stellar defense. And it just, when you're in a lineup and it's been that difficult. I mean, his OPS against lefties was 404. That was worst in the league among qualified hitters against left-handed pitching. So, and you're right, defensively, he still could get to a lot of balls. The arm wasn't what it once was, but he could still get to a lot of baseballs, and so he was valuable defensively in that way. But yeah, it's been sort of a difficult road for him because he hurts his shoulder diving for a ball in 2020, and then he plays through it in 21. The numbers go down. Last year, he misses most of the season. He gets shoulder surgery. This year, he comes in a platoon role, which is not something that he's really had to do much at all. So he platoons with Perdomo. Perdomo gets most of the starts. I think Ahmed started 54 games, if I had that number correct. It was 54, 55 games this season, which is a significant decrease when he's been healthy throughout his career, and something that Lovullo has said. They've had a lot of difficult conversations about that and him wanting answers and all that kind of stuff. So it's been very different season for him than typical. And yeah, it's just got to a point where, maybe if they're not in a playoff race, they make some sort of different move to keep Ahmed around. But I mean, and it's tough for a guy who's been here this long and now they're this close to the playoffs to get cut like that. But at the same time, on the field, they needed to do what they could to up the ceiling of the team, and that was to bring up Lawler. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely a bittersweet moment especially given how much he's given to the organization at this point.
Yeah, definitely agree with you on that. So the Chicago series, 4 games at Wrigley, a lot of day games, which is something that we're not necessarily used to seeing baseball at 11 a.m., but that's kind of what we're looking at.
Yeah.
Chicago,
a lot of day games this week. They had 2 against the Rockies. So.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Maybe they were preparing for the trip to Wrigley. Chicago's 3.5 up, 4 games up on Arizona. Chicago's currently sitting in that second wild card spot. The third is currently Miami, only half a game up on both Arizona and Cincinnati. So if you want to talk about the teams that are really competing with each other, it's Miami, Arizona, Cincinnati. But Chicago, I mean, you could imagine a scenario where the Diamondbacks take 3 of 4 in this series. They get Chicago again at Chase Field in only a couple of days after that. I think you have 7 games against Chicago in 11 days. You could flip the script and win 5 or 6 of those games, and all of a sudden you're not just in good position for that third wild card. Now all of a sudden you might open up that second wild card position as well. But Chicago's also trying to win their division.
Yeah. It's sort of like, if, on a best case scenario level, absolutely they could be competing for the second wild card spot. But man, the Cubs have been good lately. I mean, that offense, aside from the Braves, I think it's been the highest scoring offense in the league since July. And they just swept the Giants. And, you mentioned the Marlins and the Reds. The Giants are still in it for that third wild card spot, but I mean, getting swept by the Cubs really put them down a little bit, and the Giants have not been playing great baseball as of late. So the Cubs have been really, really good. The D-backs are going to see their ace, Justin Steele, in this series. They're going to see Javier Assad, who has had a good season for them. And then they'll see Jameson Taillon and Kyle Hendricks, who it's been unsteady, but, these are still guys with track records. So it's going to be a really difficult series for them to go on the road against a red-hot Cubs team and pick up a series win. If they can do it, that would be huge. They've struggled, especially lately against the better teams on their schedule. I mean, that Dodgers and Orioles series, those were tough. Then they come back and had a nice bounce back series against the Rockies, although one they probably should have swept. Yeah, it's going to be a difficult weekend for them, but you're right. They could put themselves in such good position by taking 3 out of 4 of these games. Even if they split and they come back and they could beat the Cubs in a series next weekend back at Chase Field,
I'd feel okay about that.
Feels pretty good. So yeah, it's a huge opportunity for them. There's some roster shakeup here. You mentioned Nelson's coming back up to start a game. Lawler's going to be in the lineup for some of these games. It's going to be a lot to put on some of these players, but yeah, every opportunity is still in front of them with them being so close right now.
The Cubs have won 4 in a row. They are the 3rd highest scoring offense in the National League this season. They have a run differential of plus 101.
How many teams are biting themselves for not taking a chance on Cody Bellinger, huh?
Yeah, I think that might be he might be the comeback player of the year, unless there's an obvious storyline that I'm missing in my head right now. But I mean, Cody Bellinger has really revitalized his career at a time when, you're right, nobody really wanted him. Felt like the Cubs were just taking a flyer. The Brewers, who currently sit, by my math, half a game up on Chicago, they have a differential of plus 24. Chicago's is plus 101. So, I mean, that is a bizarre division where it feels like the Cubs should be leading in the division, but
they just
won
a series against the Brewers, too. So, yeah, it's not a great time to catch the Cubs, but if you want to get to the postseason, you're going to have to beat these teams. It just is what it is.
Miami's won 6 in a row. They're currently sitting half a game up on Arizona and Cincinnati, as we talked about.
They just lost Sandy Alcantara and Jorge Soler to the IL, though.
Yeah,
and then they still beat the heck out of the Dodgers. So
one of the more bizarre teams, I know we've kind of hit on this a couple times this season, but I can't help but look at San Diego, and their run differential is plus 64, and they have probably, without a doubt, the Cy Young winner this year in Blake Snell. And yet somehow they are still 7 games back of the last wild card.
Look at their record in 1-run games.
I don't have it up right in front of me. Do you know it off the top of your head?
They're 0-for, I think. Or not maybe not
all
0-for,
year?
But, it's pretty down. It's pretty down.
Yeah, it's just bizarre to see a team be like so good at certain things and then fall so flat over the course of an entire season. Okay, so
I'll
Arizona,
get the exact number up, but it's pretty eye-opening as far as what their record is in these 1-run games. Here you go. So they are not 0-for, that was an exaggeration, but they're 6 for 22 in 1-run games, and there it is, 0-for-11 in extra inning games.
Yikes! Yeah, so that's not great.
That's how you have a good run differential, and you still are flailing below 500.
One of the most bizarre. We're all going to look back on 2023 and we're going to
be a case study.
What the heck happened with the Padres and the Mets?
Yeah.
That's bizarre. I mean, the Mets at least jumped ship mid-season. The Padres kind of just stayed pat, and boy, did it not work. Whatever they decided to do. All right, I'm excited for this Cubs series. I had 2 really important Cubs series over the next couple of days. We'll see how much work Jordan Lawler gets in the lineup and what this new, younger version of the Diamondbacks can do. Can they make it to the postseason? I guess we're going to find out. Thanks so much for checking out the Ain't No Fang podcast this week. For my good friend Alex Weiner, I'm Steve Zinsmeister. You've been listening to the Ain't No Fang podcast here on Arizona Sports, the local sports leader.